Hello, everyone. Good morning. As you can see, oops, wrong arm. You can see the sun is shining today. However, it is one of our first cold days for 2018. So my hands are cold. I'm a little bit chilly, but we're going on to let the circle be unbroken. Chapter 13. We are almost finished with this book. Well, it would be a good idea if I, cleaned my glasses so that I could see. Now, at the end of this book, I will be continuing and finishing the Singer trilogy by Calvin Miller. I am almost finished with that one. It's a series of 3 books called The Singer, the Song, and the Finale. And it is a mythical retelling of the life of Christ. So, if you're interested, after this book, run on over to that one. There are actually 3 books in that series, and I am on the finale and almost finished with the last book. So, but for today, Let the Circle Be Unbroken, Chapter 13. Last time, it was around Christmas time. Stacey was not home yet. Suzella left, and Suzella's dad, Uncle Bud, had an encounter with Stuart, the white boys, and his little friends. So, Suzella has left now. So, we're winding the story down. Let's see if we get back to Stacey today. Here we go, Chapter 13. Little man pressed his face against the front window, staring out at the misty rain which covered the land, and waited for New Year's Day to pass. Several times Mama called him from the window, and obediently he left it. But after a while he would return to it to stare out once again. So far the new year had been uneventful. Mr. Wiggins, along with little Willie and Maynard, had stopped by in the morning, and Big Ma had walked up to the Averys to visit. But now we sat, just the family, in front of the fire, not much wanting to leave it, and not much wanting company either. Then, as the afternoon darkened toward the evening, and little man still stood at the window, he turned suddenly, his eyes bright, and announced, "Sorry." Then, as the afternoon darkened toward evening, and little man still stood at the window, he turned suddenly, his eyes bright, and announced that Mr. Jameson was coming. Okay, I'm going to put this on buzz here. There we go. Okay. "I don't want to get your hopes up," Mr. Jameson said, sitting in the chair Uncle Hammer had vacated for him. "But I just heard from the sheriff of a town in Louisiana who had some information about some boys from Mississippi who'd worked a plantation near Baton Rouge." His eyes swept our anxious faces. "He said there was a possibility one of those boys could have been Stacey." The room went silent, our eyes glued to Mr. Jameson. "Where?" Mama asked breathlessly. "What's the name of the town?" "Buford, but I don't really know that much yet. Mrs. Jameson and I have been out of town this whole Christmas week and just got back late last evening. This afternoon I checked my messages and mail at the office and found a note from my secretary saying that a sheriff, Conroy, had called a few days back about the letter we sent." Papa leaned forward. "You get a chance to talk to him." I tried calling, but it being New Year's, I couldn't raise anybody at the jail. Operator said the sheriff would be in tomorrow. Thought, though, that you'd like to know about this as soon as possible. How far is Buford into Louisiana? I'm not sure, but I think it's north of Baton Rouge. Mama leaned toward Papa. We could leave now and be in Buford by tomorrow, couldn't we? Before Papa could answer, Mr. Jameson said, I wouldn't do that, Miss Logan. Go there, I mean. Not yet. I think it'd be better if I got a chance to talk to this Sheriff Conroy on the phone and see if those boys are actually there. He took a moment to clear his throat. One other thing. I checked with my secretary about the call. She said Sheriff Conroy mentioned something about some of the boys who worked at the plantation being in jail in another county. Jail? Don't alarm yourselves yet. We don't know if Stacey was at that particular plantation. I imagine a good number of Mississippi workers go into Louisiana to chop cane. You say you'll call tomorrow? First thing. Can you give him a call at home? Can't you give him a call at home? Questioned Uncle Hammer. Hammer, it's New Year's, Big Ma reminded him. Mama, what I care what day it is? Stacey in jail somewheres? I want to know about it now. Tried this house, Mr. Jameson said. No one at home. Uncle Hammer sighed impatiently. Papa glanced at him and then back to Mr. Jameson. What time you planning on calling in the morning? Beginning of business hours, 8 o'clock. You won't after I find out something. I can come back out. No, we'll be in. Mr. Jameson's eyes met Papa's. All right. Then he stood. I guess I'd better be getting on back to town. I don't like neglecting Mrs. Jameson on a holiday. At the door he looked back at us. Please don't get your hopes up. It might not even be him. When he was gone, Papa, Uncle Hammer, and Mr. Morrison drove over to Smellings Creek to tell Mr. Turner about the call, and upon their return, little was said. Mr. Morrison excused himself early. Uncle Hammer and Papa exchanged a few words. Then they, too, grew quiet. Even Christopher John and Little Man made no speculations about the possibility that Stacey was perhaps only a phone call away. It was as if, after all this time of hoping, thoughts of Stacey were now too fragile to be spoken out loud. And we each kept our own thoughts, afraid of speaking them, afraid of somehow dashing this new hope. I couldn't sleep. The night was too long, the thoughts racing through my head too labored. As I waited for the crowing of the roosters, which seemed as if it would never come, I kept trying to picture what it would be like to see Stacey again. I had to remind myself that we didn't know much of anything, not really, and that thought made me want to rush the coming of morning even more so, that we would know something. Several times I got up, crossed to the window, and looked up at the sky, trying to see if the moon had gotten stuck up there, making it impossible for the sun to rise. On my 5th trip to the window, Big Ma said, Child, you just wearing out that floor. It be morning in the Lord's own good time. She sounded wide awake. She hadn't been able to sleep either. Come on back to bed and rest yourself. I ain't gonna sleep. Most likely you ain't. But rest yourself anyways. It's gonna be a big day tomorrow. Long before dawn, I heard Mr. Morrison in the barn, hitching Jack to the wagon. He was getting an early start into Strawberry. Then I heard Papa and Uncle Hammer join him. The three talked for several minutes. And when Mr. Morrison had gone, Papa and Uncle Hammer re-entered the house and went into the kitchen. A few minutes later, Mama and Big Ma got up and went there too. With so much activity going on, I wasn't surprised when Christopher John and little man pushed open the door and patted in, whispering, "Cassie, you asleep?" I sat up. "No." They came over and sat on the bed. "You think it's him?" asked little man, his voice a mere whisper. "I don't know." "If it is," Christopher John said, "what he doing in jail?" "It's just gotta be him is all I gotta say," little man decided. "High time he come on home." I heard one sniffle and then no more. Then they lay back on the bed saying nothing else, and together we watched the moon sliding too slowly westward. Finally, I fell asleep. Cassie, wake up." I opened my eyes. Mama was sitting beside me on the bed. Little man and Christopher John lay crossways on the bed, covered by a blanket, still sleeping. Mama talked softly, not to waken them. "Cassie, your papa and I have decided to go with Miz Lee Annie this morning, and we've decided you can go too." I sat up immediately. "I can?" Mama glanced over at Christopher John and little man to see if I had awakened them. They were still asleep. "Mr. Morrison left early to get Russell, since there's not enough room for everybody in the car. Miss Ellis and Miss Lee Annie will be going with us." I nodded, excited not only about going with Miss Lee Annie, but that I would be in Strawberry when Mr. Jameson made the call about Stacey. "Now, Cassie," Mama said, her voice low, strained, "we've talked about this before. How dangerous this thing can be." She took my hand. "We decided you should go because it's important that you see this. But Cassie, I expect you to keep that mouth of yours shut. I don't want to hear one word out of you all the while we're in that office. Do you hear me? I'll do the talking." "Yes'm," I promised. An hour later, I was sitting in the car with Mama and Papa and Uncle Hammer. Little man and Christopher John stood beside the car, bemoaning the fact that they couldn't go. "Sure, we wish we could go," each one of them managed to slip in at least twice. And Big Ma said, "Mary, hug Lee Annie for me and wish her well." "Yes, ma'am, I will." "And y'all bring us back some good news this time about that boy. Good news, you hear?" She dabbed at her eyes, then waved us on. "Y'all go now and be careful." We said goodbye and headed down the drive with Big Ma, Christopher John, and little man waving after us. At the rise where the oak stood, I looked back once more. They were still standing there. It was a little after 8 o'clock when we reached Strawberry. Mr. Morrison and Russell, dressed in civilian clothes, were waiting for us in front of Mr. Jameson's office across from the courthouse square. To our surprise, Mr. Tom B. and Wardell were with them. "I told that old woman she was crazy," Mr. Tom B. explained as we got out of the car. "But she crazy enough to come trying to register. I guess I'm crazy enough to come in with her." The door to Mr. Jameson's office opened, and Mr. Jameson came out looking tired, as if he had gotten as little sleep as we. And not for the first time. I wondered why he cared so much. "I just called Buford," he said after greeting us, "but I wasn't able to get anyone. I guess they're a little late getting in this morning." Mama glanced away to hide her disappointment, but Papa said, "How long before you planning on trying again?" "Another half hour and the operator's supposed to try again. You want to, you can come in and wait. We've got a bit of business to take care of first, but I'll be back before you call again." "All right, I'll see you then." He gave us a nod and returned to his office. "You know, Mary," said Miss Lee Annie, "you and Cassie here, y'all ain't got to go in with me. This here about that child is what y'all need to be tending to. I can make out with just Leora." Mama refused to hear of Miss Lee Annie's going in without her. We've got half an hour yet before we hear anything, so let's just put that time to good use and get you registered." "Well, Miz Lee Annie," Papa said, "you ladies going to the courthouse. I imagine we best get started. We'll walk y'all over." Miz Lee Annie made a quick but useless adjustment to her hat and the bow-tied ribbon of her best dress, then ran her hand over the front of her coat. "All right, let's go." It had been decided earlier that only Mama, Mrs. Ellis, and I would go into the courthouse with Miz Lee Annie, and that none of the men would go. Their presence could prove too threatening. Mr. Tom B. stayed in the wagon, Mr. Morrison beside it. The rest of us, including Wardell, who jumped from the wagon to follow at the last minute, crossed the street to MacGyver. "Wardell," I said as we crossed the street, "you think it's him?" Wardell looked at me, not even needing me to explain my words. He knew my thoughts. "You think it is?" At that exact moment, I decided I did. "Yeah, I do. Then most likely it's him then." At the courthouse steps, Mama said, "David, you hear anything at all, you let me know." "Don't worry, sugar." He kissed her lightly, then looked at me. "I'm right proud of you. I want you to know that." "Yes, sir." Miz Lee Annie started up the steps, and Miss Ellis, Mama, and I followed her. At the top, we took a moment to look back, then stepped inside the courthouse. The registrar's office was on the first floor. We stood silently before the door leading to it, reading the lettering and giving ourselves another moment to gather our courage. Mama looked around at each of us. "Ready?" she said. We nodded, and she opened the door. A woman sitting at a typewriter, her fingers busy at the keys, glanced up as we entered, then back at the sheaf of papers from which she was typing. We stood before her waiting. She finished a page, pulled it from the typewriter, and took the time to separate the carbons from the original before finally looking at us again. At last, she deigned to speak. "What y'all want?" she asked. Miss Lee Annie told her. The woman looked as if she had gone hard of hearing. "What?" "Come to register so's I can vote," Miss Lee Annie repeated. The woman stared at us. "All of y'all coming for that?" "No, ma'am," Miss Lee Annie spoke up again. "Just me." The woman rose from her chair, her eyes on us as if we were some strange alien creatures who had wandered in, then crossed the room to another office in the back. The door was open, and we could see her talking to a man there. He looked up surprised, much as the woman had done, and when she pointed to Miss Lee Annie, he stood and walked out with a scowl on his face. The woman followed. "Whose nigger are you?" the man demanded. Miss Lee Annie, the dignity of her being lining her face, replied, "I works Mr. Granger's land." The man eyed her a moment, turned to the woman. "Doreen, Mr. Granger in town?" "Seen him upstairs in the hall just a little bit ago, Mr. Boudin." "Then go get him and tell him we need him here," ordered Mr. Boudin, and returned to his office. Within minutes, Doreen was back with Mr. Granger. He cast us a disapproving glance as he entered, but waited for Mr. Boudin to hurry from his office before speaking. "Now, what's going on here, Sam?" he demanded, his voice soft but annoyed. Mr. Boudin flashed a vexed look at Doreen that said she was supposed to have told him. But Doreen was already busying herself at the typewriter once more, removing herself from the explosion that was sure to come. "This old auntie, she says she's one of your niggers and she wants to register," Mr. Boudin explained. Mr. Granger's silence filled the room. "Lee Annie," he said at last. "What kind of nonsense is this?" Miz Lee Annie took a deep breath before answering. "Wants to register so's I can vote." "Vote?" "Yes, sir." Looking around at Mr. Boudin, Mr. Granger allowed a lopsided grin. Mr. Boudin, seemingly relieved, shrugged his own disbelief. "Now, Lee Annie," said Mr. Granger, "you old enough to know that voting is white folks' business. Now, what makes you think you be butting in it?" "Now, what make you think to be butting in it?" Miss Lee Annie's words failed her. Mama spoke up for her. "Her father voted. She wants to do the same." Mr. Granger ignored Mama as he spoke again to Miss Lee Annie. "You gonna make a fool of yourself. You know that, don't you?" "I hopes not, sir." Mr. Granger pursed his lips at her reply, then fixed his gaze on Mama. "This here you're doing, Mary? Putting this old woman up to trying to vote? Thought I'd stopped you from messing in what you got no business." "You stopped me from teaching at great faith." "Look like I ain't stopped nothing else." Mama did not reply, but animosity sparked her eyes. Her lips trembled, then her eyes shifted, not to the floor as Mr. Granger would have expected, but to Doreen, Mr. Boudin, and back again to him. Mr. Granger noted this in silence and turned to Miss Ellis, who was nervously twisting a handkerchief in her thin hands. "Leora, what you and Paige doing supporting this old woman in this?" Mrs. Ellis looked confused. "Maybe y'all rather be living someplace else." "Oh, no, sir." "Ain't I been good to y'all, letting y'all work that land even when y'all's crops don't hardly bring in enough money to pay for your seed and your clothing and such I given y'all credit for? And y'all come to me during these hard times and ask me for more credit, and I done give it to you? Ain't that so?" Miss Ellis was trembling. "Yes, sir." Her words were barely a mumble, a wordless shaking fear. "Even for giving y'all for supporting that wagoning business up to Vicksburg a while back," he noted, continuing to laud his goodness. "And this here's how y'all pays me for my trouble? Y'all trying to do something y'all know good and well that I don't approve of. Round here messing in something you got to no business." "We tried to talk her out of it, Mr. Granger," Miss Ellis managed to say, "but her mind was set to it. Ain't none of us meant no harm. Truly we ain't." Mr. Granger eyed her in true disappointment, then seemingly almost ready to forgive the behavior of the morning, turned and said, "That how you feel, Lee Annie?" "Yes, sir." "Then you're going to give up this foolishness?" A pause for Miss Lee Annie. "No, sir." Mr. Granger sucked in his breath, his patience gone. He was about to speak again when the door was flung open and Stuart Walker rushed in, his face white and anxious. "Mr. Granger, thank the Lord you're here," he said. "Something awful's about to happen. My daddy sent me." "Stuart, calm yourself," said Mr. Granger. Stuart took a deep breath. "Now, what is it?" Stuart glanced over at us. "Maybe we ought to talk in the hall." Mr. Granger followed Stuart's gaze and pursed his lips, and the two of them went out. The rest of us waited, including Mr. Boudin, who seemed unwilling to move from behind the counter until Mr. Granger had decided how to handle this. I wondered what the awful thing was that Stuart was talking about and whispered to Mama about it. Old Doreen looked up angrily. "Y'all gonna be talking in here," she said. "Y'all can just go on outside." I cut my eyes at her, but now, remembering Mama's warning, grew silent. Several minutes passed, and when the door opened, Mr. Granger came in alone. Mr. Boudin waited for him to speak. "Sam, I'm going to leave this to you," he said to Mr. Boudin's surprise. "Give her the test." "But, Mr. Granger, I ain't never registered no nigger." Give her the test and registering her are two different things, Mr. Granger concluded. She got her poll taxes paid? Why, I don't know. They is, said Miz Lee Annie. I'd have to check, Mr. Boudin finished, speaking still to Mr. Granger. Then you do that. Everything in order, you let her take that test. She got her mind set on it so bad. He put his hand on the doorknob. But Mr. Granger, a nigger? Mr. Granger's gaze went cold. You the registrar, ain't you? Well, yes, sir, but... Then do your job. His eyes swept once more around the room and he went out. Mr. Boudin stared at the closed door. Doreen's typewriter clattered noisily. All right, said Mr. Boudin tightly. What's your full name here? As he checked the poll tax records, Miss Ellis, her voice a raspy whisper, urged Miss Lee Annie to give it up. Aunt Lee Annie, you can't go doing this now, not after what Mr. Granger said. Yes, I can. Please, Aunt Lee Annie. Leora, I thought I'd done explain this to you. Now either you stay or you go, but hush, 'cause I'm going to do this thing. Defeat swept over Miss Ellis's face, and she said no more. Mr. Boudin's brow went up quizzically after several long minutes. Then he slammed the poll ledger shut, took out a book, a sheet of paper and a pencil, and handed them to Miss Lee Annie. Section 243. Explain the meaning of it on this here paper. Miss Lee Annie looked pleased. Section 243, say? He only looked at her and she took it as his affirmation. Yes, sir. This here's plumb foolishness, he admonished as she went over to the table. Can't no darky understand the complexities of the Constitution. Ain't got the sense for it. Miss Lee Annie turned. Mr. Boudin, sir, she said. He kept his eyes on her, but didn't acknowledge her address. Mr. Boudin, she repeated, her voice low and dignified. I done studied. Done studied near a year now, and I knows the Constitution. Can't nobody tell me I don't. Knows sections 1 through 285. Knows articles 1 through 15. Knows about the judiciary and the legislature. Knows about the executive too. I knows all that stuff, and I wants you to know I knows it. And even if I don't pass this here test, I knows it, and can't nobody take away nothing I know. Nobody. Then her shoulders back, she sat down to the stares of both Mr. Boudin and Doreen. I swear to God, Mr. Boudin said, shaking his head and going back to his office. The older they get, the more childlike they become. Miss Lee Annie had been taking the test only a few minutes when the registrar's door opened and Russell motioned for Mama. Doreen looked up irritably at yet another intrusion into her sanctum, but did not say anything as Mama, Mrs. Ellis, and I quietly slipped into the hall. Russell, what have you heard? Mama immediately asked. Mr. Jameson raised the sheriff over at Buford. Got him on the phone now. Do they know about Stacey yet? Russell shook his head. Sorry, but he ain't said. All I know is Mr. David said come get y'all. All right, Mama looked at the door. What about Miss Lee Annie? I'll go in and wait for her, said Russell. Mama hesitated. No, I don't think you should. A young man in there, well, it'll just make for trouble. She turned to Miss Ellis. Leora, do you think you can wait for her alone? Miss Ellis looked frightened and uncertain. I'll be right outside the building. You need me, Russell assured her. Miss Ellis nervously bit her lip. Finally, she said she would stay. Mama watched her a moment longer as if uncertain whether Miss Ellis should be left alone. Just don't say anything more than necessary, she instructed, and things should be all right. But keep a close watch. Mr. Granger gave in too easily about that test, and I don't like it. Miss Ellis nodded weakly and watched us as we hurried out the door. Leaving Russell at the steps, Mama and I practically raced across the lawn, and we're almost at the street when someone called to us. Jake Willis came running up. His eyes were bloodshot. He was unshaven, and his clothes were wrinkled as if he had slept in them. "Lord, Miss Logan, am I glad to see y'all," he laughed. "Come in town New Year's Eve, and I got stuck here. My ride went off and just left me. Like to go back with y'all." "It might be a while yet." "Don't matter." Once again he laughed that laugh of his. "Got caught up in a card game that took every penny I had, so's I can't hardly go being choosy about waiting. Now can I?" "We're parked over there," Mama said, starting off again with me at her side. Jake Willis caught her arm. Mama turned, her gaze a chilling one. He let her go. "Excuse me, Miss Logan, but ain't that Russell standing over there yonder in front of the courthouse? He with y'all?" "He is, and we're in quite a hurry, Mr. Willis." "You don't say. Well, excuse me again. Guess I'll just go on and wait with Russell then." "Suit yourself," Mama said, and we walked on. When we reached the wagon, Mama told me to stay with Mr. Morrison. "But, Mama—" "Mind me now," she ordered without giving me a chance to protest, and rushed inside. I watched the door close behind her, then feeling scared and alone, sat on the car's running board, my eyes fixed on the office door. After a few moments, Mr. Morrison quietly said, "Just a while longer now, Cassie, just a while longer." "Yes, sir," I sighed and looked around. "Mr. Morrison, where Wardell?" Mr. Morrison, too, looked around, his brow furrowed. "Ain't he over on the other side of the car there?" "Was a minute ago," put in Mr. Tom B. "Said something about Lee Annie liking flowers and just went off." Mr. Morrison stepped back from the wagon. "I expect then I best go look for her." "Lord a mercy, what's this here?" I stood up to see what Mr. Tom B. was shouting about. Coming from the north down the main street of Strawberry was a dragon. A dragon. Sorry, y'all. Wasn't a dragon. It was a wagon drawn by two plodding mules and loaded with some 6 feet high, with shabby furniture and household goods, while poor-looking people sat atop it all, staring out blankly at the street ahead. Behind it came another wagon, looking very much like the first, followed by another, then another. It was a procession. Cars and trucks were a part of it, loaded down like the wagons and coming just as slowly. Most of the people who sat atop the wagons and in the cars and trucks were white, but there were some black faces too. All were the same, grim and humorless, reflecting the despair of the dispossessed. As the procession grew, rolling forward as if it were one continuous body, townspeople came from offices and shops to stare silently. The people in the procession were just as silent, and for a while the only sound which could be heard was the crunching of wheels against the pavement and the whir of poorly kept motors and poorly kept vehicles. Then the lead wagon swung onto the courthouse lawn. Those following did the same, and the townsmen cried, "What the devil?" and another, "Somebody get the sheriff." We stood as curious as the townspeople, not knowing any more than they, though I couldn't help but wonder if this was the awful thing Stewart had been talking about. "Cassie, what you doing here?" I looked across the street and saw Jeremy Sims running our way. "Y'all see what's happening?" he asked. "We see a whole lot of folks," I said. "Some of 'em's from the Walker plantation," Jeremy explained. "They's the ones Mr. Walker put off. Bunch of them others are day laborers, and folks got put off their places a while back and been living down along the river north of here." "Oh, a friend of ours came up late last night and said they was going to do this. Ain't it something? Yeah, it's something all right. What bring y'all into town? Y'all know about this? We come about Stacey, I said, deciding it was better not to mention anything about Miz Lee Annie's attempting to register. Jeremy's eyes brightened. Y'all done got some news? Mr. Jameson says he might be round Baton Rouge. He checking now. Jeremy started to ask another question, but seeing his father across the street, he said hastily, I'm going to have to go, Cassie, but I'll be a-hoping it's him. I just bet you it is. I'll talk to you later. Here? Okay, I said, as Jeremy left to join his father. I heard Mr. Jameson's door open and ran to meet Papa, Mama, and Uncle Hammer. Is it him? I cried. Is it? Papa put his hand on my shoulder to calm me down. We still don't know, he said. He looked out at the wagons and cars continuing to come, then back at me as Uncle Hammer walked over to Mr. Morrison to find out what was going on. What we know is this. The sheriff there said he'd heard about 5 boys running away from a plantation some ways down south of Baton Rouge during the week of December 8th. But that was over 3 weeks ago. I know, sugar, but seems that what happened was some money was stolen and the law went looking for the boys, done it. They caught up with 2 of the boys in a place called Shokesville. They caught 2 others quite a ways from there, headed west. He was silent. I was silent. But you said there was 5, I said. What happened to the 5th one? Mama touched Papa's arm. The 5th one, he got killed. I bit deep into my lower lip, my mind blanking out, unaware of all that was bubbling around me. But we don't know who the boy was, or even if it was Stacey, and Mo are among the 5. One other thing. Seems one of the boys they caught headed west had the stolen money. The others ain't had nothing to do with it. We know, too, Stacey and Mo, they wouldn't have been going west. Mama came closer. What we're waiting for now is to speak to the sheriff in Shokesville. He'll have the names of the boys that are there. The sheriff in Beaufort didn't. I didn't say anything. David, said Uncle Hammer, coming back with Mr. Morrison, I don't much like the looks of this. It could get ugly. What's going on? Mr. Morrison explained it. Papa looked out at the courthouse, the lawn, Papa looked out at the courthouse, the lawn, and MacGyver Street, no longer visible, as the farm families claimed space for their wagons and trucks. The procession was still coming. Ain't it about time Miz Lee Annie was finished? Should be by now, Mama said. The section she had to explain dealt with the poll tax. She knows it well. Papa's brow furrowed. He listened to the crowd, no longer silent, not noisy either, but producing sounds that masked into an indistinguishable murmur. Hammer, I think you and me better go get her and Leora. They ain't going to make it through there alone. Mama reminded them that Russell was waiting outside the courthouse. Think we still ought to go, said Uncle Hammer. Why don't I go? Suggested Mr. Morrison. That way, y'all can be here come to call. Papa shook his head. You don't mind. I'd rather you stay here and see to things if the crowd move back this way. Mr. Morrison nodded, understanding. David, Hammer, Mama called as they started off. Please, be careful. There they are, I cried. There, Miz Lee Annie, Miss Ellis. I was standing with Mr. Tom B. in the wagon to better see over the crowd. Mama and Mr. Morrison remained on the sidewalk. Mr. Tom B. stared out, searching. Where, child? Up there at the top of them steps, standing alongside Mr. Granger and the sheriff. What are they doing there? He questioned. Why don't they come on down? They wouldn't be standing there unless they had to. Mama shook her head. I don't like this, not at all. Mr. Morrison frowned. Same peculiar, all right. Russell's there, too. A few steps down, next to Jake Willis. Lord, mumbled Mr. Tomby, why don't they come on back? Sheriff Hank Dobbs climbed into the courthouse ledge so everyone could see him. You folks know this here's an unlawful assembly, he cried. Y'all's on government property and y'all's breaking the law. Now I want y'all to get on back in y'all's wagons or y'all's cars or y'all's trucks and get on home. Home? Where? Someone cried from the congestion. You tell us, where? Another voice rose angry and piercing. Had a home, but Hamden Walker put us off it. Now where we supposed to go, huh? Where are we supposed to take our families? Hamden Walker said the government tell him he can't plant all his land, someone else shouted. And he say that's why he put us off. Well, that the case, we figure maybe it's the government owe us. Figure to stay here till we gets heard. A mighty clamoring arose from the crowd. The sheriff held up his hand, signaling for quiet. But several minutes passed before he could be heard again. Now, y'all want to speak y'all's piece, y'all just going to have to go through the proper channels. Y'all present y'all's complaints in a civilized manner, in the proper way, and at the proper time. Right now's the proper way and the proper time. Yeah, you got a roof over your head, ain't you, Hank? Y'all shut us up before. Y'all ain't shutting us up no more. Ain't got nothing else to lose. Should have stood up for the union. Should have stood up for the union before. Maybe we'd have something now. Stuart Walker leapt to the ledge to stand beside the sheriff. It's that damn communist union got y'all not listening to the reason. Mr. Morris Wheeler's behind this here. I know it. Where is he? Where is that communist agitator? You out there? Stand up and show yourself, Morris Wheeler. He ain't gotta show hisself, a voice cried out. He been right all along. It's you and your damn daddy and these here other landlords doing all the devilment. Now y'all listen to me. We'll listen. We'll listen to plenty when y'all give us our farms back. And us day laborers get $1.50 a day. With these words, the noise grew so tumultuous that Stuart's words were lost, dead, unheard, as the crowd shut him out, refusing to listen. The roar continued for several minutes, then someone started shouting, $1.50 a day! Don't take our farms away! The chant caught on, and the disorganized onslaught of the noise took on one voice, and there was nothing Stuart could do against it. He stepped down. At that moment, Mr. Jameson's secretary opened the door and called Mama inside. Mr. Jameson had Shokesville on the line. Go on, Miss Logan, Mr. Morrison said when Mama hesitated. Ain't nothing you can do bad up there, and I'll be here. Mama looked gratefully up at him and followed the secretary inside. The noise ran unabated for several minutes as Stuart conferred with Mr. Granger and Sheriff Dobbs. Then Harlan Granger himself, looking as confident as ever, stepped out on the ledge. The crowd saw him and the chanting weakened, but someone heated up enough to take on even Harlan Granger started the chant up once more, and the crowd grew boisterous again. Harlan Granger, however, was a formidable adversary. He outweighted them. When silence reigned and not before, Harlan Granger spoke. I take it y'all's for the union, he said glibly. A mighty cheer went up. I take it, he said, when there was quiet again. Y'all's for $1.50 a day in keeping your farms. Another cheer rose to the heavens. I take it, he said in the same calm, steady voice. Y'all's for schooling with niggers, socializing with niggers, marrying with niggers. An uneasy murmur waved over the square, and a man spoke up. Now, Mr. Granger, don't go mixing up what's for the union with that other stuff. Well, y'all got a mixed organization here, ain't you? Y'all white and colored working together in this thing, ain't you? For this $1.50 a day business and this farm keeping business? I see quite a number of black faces out there amongst y'all. The people looked around. Harlan Granger knew where to strike, and he had struck very well. Seemed to me, he said, y'all got yourselves the beginning of a lot of trouble here. Don't y'all know by now once a worm gets in an apple, the apple's ruined? You want to save the barrel, you best rid yourself of the worms. Nothing now was said. Then someone spoke up, defying him. Don't y'all see what he's doing? He's playing on your racial feelings to tear down the union, to keep us from being strong together. All eyes shifted to a wagon near the statue of Jefferson Davis. Standing in the wagon with several other men was Morris Wheeler, and Dubé Cross was with him. Why, that's old Dubé. Why, what's old Dubé doing up there? I wanted to know. My question went unanswered. Now, nobody's talking about schooling together, socializing together, and certainly not marrying together. What we're talking about here in this union is a decent living for everybody, both white and colored. And we all know we can't have that unless we stick together in this thing. Harlan Granger waited a moment as if pleased at having flushed out his prey. Y'all think I don't want y'all to have more money and a roof over your heads for yourselves and your families? I want that my own self. But I say you can get it without this here communist union. This here communist union that mixes the races, colored with the white. Y'all mark my words, this here union mixing is only the beginning of what's to come. If niggers totally misguided by white people like Morris Wheeler there. Of niggers totally misguided by white people like Mr. Morris Wheeler there. Of niggers who get the feeling like they done mixed with white folks a little bit, they got the right to take over white folks' things. Harlan Granger, cried Morris Wheeler, you're deliberately exaggerating extremes here. This is not a communist union. The union only wants... I'm exaggerating, am I? Well, just take a look over here on these steps. At that old lady right there. Y'all other folks step back out of the way now so the folks out there can see Aunt Lee Annie Lee's. Hank, move 'em back. The sheriff did as he was told. The white people fell back, leaving Miz Lee Annie, Miss Ellis, Russell, and Jake Willis exposed, an island of dark faces on the steps. Jake Willis attempted to move away, but Deputy Haynes pushed him back with the others. There. Now, y'all see her? That old auntie right there. Been living on my place going on near 40 years, off and on. Ain't much had no trouble from her. Till now. Till this union business put ideas in her head. He looked over the faces of the poor white farmers staring up at him with little more to hold on to than the belief that they were better than black people, and continued to chisel at them. After all them years, y'all know what she done this day? Again his eyes skimmed the faces, waiting anxiously to hear. Against my advisement, she gone in and tried to register to vote. The murmuring swelled, crescendoed into disbelief, then fell mute into stunned dismay. No education, no understanding of the Constitution of this great state, no natural mental ability to understand, and she goes and does a thing like that. I tell you this now, as I've been telling you all along, there's no place for unions or mixing in the great state of Mississippi. You thought of what'll happen to our great state if people like this try to perform tasks that they ain't even got the God-given makeup for? He turned an accusing gaze upon Miz Lee Annie, pointing his finger at her. You deny that's what you done, Lee Annie? Miz Lee Annie bowed her head and didn't answer. You hear me talking to you, Lee Annie? He waited for her to speak. We all waited. Well, Lee Annie. Suddenly Russell spoke up, his voice distinct and clear as it carried across the square. Mr. Granger's asking if my grandmama went to try to register. Well, the answer is yes, she did. He rushed on, hushing the crowd. But that's got nothing to do with the union. What Mr. Willis said about the decent living, that's what the union's about. That's why colored people are standing up for the union. A decent living's what we all want. That's right, added Mr. Wheeler. Don't get caught up in Harlan Granger's trap. He's got other reasons than the ones he's given you for not wanting this union. He's getting plenty of money from the government with their crop reduction plan. Money that's supposed to be yours. I say Mr. Granger's right, someone shouted. What we want to be part of a nigger organization for. Niggers here trying to get to boss white folks around pretty soon. Y'all just heard that nigger talking up there orating like a white man. But what he was a-saying is the truth, another declared. I don't care what that old woman done. Can't destroy the union 'cause of it. Maybe you don't, but I do. Me for one, I ain't gonna have no nigger talking down to me and mine. I ain't gonna have no niggers voting either. I say ain't any niggers getting beyond themselves ought to be taken care of, and we can begin right now with that old woman up there. Someone laughed. Wouldn't take much to give her a whipping. Course she might fall dead, you do. Miz Lee Annie looked up. Russell stepped in front of her. Union or no union, he cried. Nobody touches a hair on her head. She ain't done nothing ain't her legal right. She got much right as anybody. Right? Questioned Harlan Granger. Right? Russell looked around the square and didn't answer. I knew that he had said too much. Everyone knew. An awful silence settled over the day, and the tension swelled like hot air in a balloon. Everyone was silent, waiting. Then someone shouted something vile, and from the steps of the Jefferson Davis statue, a man threw a bottle aimed at Russell. It hit, shattering against Russell's head. Jake Willis grabbed at his left eye as if he, too, had been hit, and both men went down. Several shots rang out. Then everything happened at once. Pop and Uncle Hammer leaped up the steps, grabbing Jake Willis and Russell, pushed them and the women back into the courthouse. The crowd stirred, alarmed by the sound of gunfire. Near the Jefferson Davis statue, a fight broke out. Horses and mules neighed nervously, and engines roared to life. On the street, people were trying to move themselves and their possessions out of the congestion, but there seemed nowhere to go. Cassie, get off that wagon and get inside, yelled Mr. Morrison. Mr. Tom B. hurried off the wagon, and I turned to follow, but then I saw Wardell coming from nowhere, his lithe body slitting razor-like through the congested street. He wove madly toward the square, headed not for Russell, but the man at the statue. Suddenly I panicked, remembering the dead bird and the cat Wardell had killed because of it, and without thinking further, I jumped over the side of the wagon into the street to try and reach him. Cassie! I heard Mr. Morrison calling me, but I couldn't answer. The congestion in the street was even worse than it had looked from the wagon. A man stepped heavily upon my foot, and a large woman pressed me against the wagon as she squeezed by, making it hard for me to breathe. What was even worse was that I couldn't see beyond the press of people around me. I tried to push through, but found it useless. I felt as if I was drowning. Then powerful hands lifted me straight upward, and I found myself in the wagon again. Mr. Morrison held my face in his hand, and Mama said, "Cassie, you all right?" I tried to catch my breath, glad she'd come back out. "Yes'm, but Wardell." "Wardell?" questioned Mr. Morrison. I nodded and then turned to look over the crowd. I spotted Wardell slowed like everyone else. I pointed to him. "He's heading for that fellow through the bottle." Mr. Morrison glanced out over the square, then immediately jumped off the wagon and began bulldozing his way through the crowd toward Wardell. Another shot cracked the morning, and the sheriff yelled across the square, "I want everybody to move on out. Everybody. That go for you too, Stanley Cross. Get a move on. D.T. Cranston, help direct that traffic out of here. Wade Jameson over there, give us a hand at that end." "Where's we supposed to go?" someone remembered to ask again. "All I can tell you is out of here. I have to shoot off this gun one more time. I'm going to call the governor and get the National Guard. Now move!" I wanted to stay in the wagon, but Mama hurried me off and into Mr. Jameson's office. There we waited, huddled with Mr. Tom B., for the others to come back. Mama told me there was still no word about Stacey. A good while passed before we saw Mr. Morris again. Wardell was with him, stone-faced, his eyes staring straight ahead. When they reached the wagon, Wardell climbed wordlessly onto the back and sat haunched there, staring out across the square. Mama slipped outside to talk to Mr. Morrison, then came back in. "Mama," I questioned. Mr. Morrison stopped him. I looked at Wardell, so still, so quiet, and I wondered. As the farmers moved out and the crowd began to thin, Miz Lee Annie, Russell, and Miss Ellis wove their way across the square. Russell's head was bandaged with what looked to be a part of cotton slip, the eyelets giving it a decorative effect. When they neared the wagon, all of us but Wardell rushed out to meet them. Wardell watched, but did not move from where he was. "Don't worry now," Russell said, stepping wearily onto the sidewalk. "We okay, and I ain't bad hurt." Wardell scrutinized his cousin sharply and then settled back, his eyes still on him. "The doctor look at you?" Mama demanded. "No. Mama Lee fixed me up. When that bottle hit it, it knocked me down. Didn't knock me out, though." Miss Lee Annie fingered the bandage in concern. "Cut wasn't so mighty deep, but my mind'll rest more easy once that doctor do take a look, or Caroline won." "Lordy," said Mr. Tom B., "what I want to know is how y'all got stuck up there like y'all done. Just what the devil was going on?" Miss Ellis shook her head, tears streaming down her face, her eyes already swollen from crying. "We never should have come. None of us. We never should have come." "Just what happened?" Mama asked again. "Where's David and Hammer?" Miss Lee Annie sat down wearily on the raised wooden sidewalk. "Well, child, we come out of that registrar's office. Ain't passed the test. And Mr. Granger was waiting for us. Tried getting out that side door there, but it was locked, and Mr. Granger, he said, 'Come on, go through the front.' Got outside, and Russell and Jake Willis was there. Old sheriff wouldn't let us leave. Then there was all that ruckus that fool threw that bottle, hit Russell and broke, and that glass went flying everywhere. Caught Jake Willis in the eye. David and Hammer, they pushed through when that bottle hit and got us all back inside. Them two, they took Jake Willis over to the doctor." She paused, then let out a tired sigh. "I expect he gonna lose that eye." "Never should have come," Mrs. Ellis lamented once more. She bowed her head into her hand. "The whole thing, crazy foolishness. Whole thing." Suddenly a lone voice rose above the din of moving things, and we looked back toward the courthouse. Standing defiantly alone on the steps of the Jefferson Davis statue, Dubé was shouting, $1.50 a day. Don't take our farms away. He was the last defender of the chant. No one joined him. Haynes, get that nigger off that statue, the sheriff yelled to the deputy. And do like I told you and get them other union leaders done caused all this ruckus. Dutifully, Deputy Haynes led Dubé from the statue, and a few minutes later we saw him and two other townsmen bringing Dubé, Morris Wheeler, and Mr. Tate Sutton back toward the jail, their hands cuffed behind them. The people in the wagons and the cars and the trucks paid little attention, moving out of Strawberry as silently as they had come. The union, for the time being anyway, was broken once again. The street was nearly back to normal. A few wagons still passed by on their way out of town, to who knows where. And townspeople could still be seen on the sidewalks, talking in small groups. But soon they too drifted away. Mr. Jameson came back from directing traffic and went into his office to try to call Shokesville again. We remained where we were to wait for Papa and Uncle Hammer. It was almost an hour when they finally returned. They confirmed that Jake Willis had indeed lost his eye. It ain't a pretty sight, Papa said, and he ain't taking it well. Not well at all. Well, anyone lose an eye, Mama sympathized. Uncle Hammer looked over at Russell. Think you ought to know he's blaming you. Russell looked up incredulous. Me? Why, I got hit my own self. Blaming you just the same for speaking up. Miz Lee Annie shuddered. He'll most likely get over it when his pain passes. If I'd have thought that, I'd have never even mentioned it. But I've seen men like Jake Willis before. He's mean and he won't let it pass, Russell. You watch out for him. Russell bowed his head and sighed wearily. Papa turned to Mama. Mary, what about Mr. Jameson? You get that call through? We got a clerk, that's all. And she wouldn't tell us anything. Said we'd have to speak directly to the sheriff, but he's still not there. Mr. Jameson's been trying the last hour. Restlessly, Papa paced the sidewalk, then leaned against a post. But when a few minutes more had passed, he pulled from the post and headed for Mr. Jameson's office. It's taking too long. I ain't waiting no longer. Mama caught us on. What are you going to do? Going down there. Then I'm going too. Without his saying anything, I knew that Uncle Hammer, already at Papa's side, would be going as well. I wanted desperately to go with him, and even though I feared the answer would be no, as Papa opened the door to Mr. Jameson's office, I blurted out, Papa, let me go with y'all. Papa's glance fell on me. It's a long ride. I don't care. I can stand it. Please, Papa. Mama gave her approval, and he said, You been waiting long as we have. 'Spect you have a right to go. Papa went into the office with Mama and Uncle Hammer. Several minutes later, they came out with Mr. Jameson. I didn't have to go up to Vicksburg tonight for that trial starting at the morning. I'd go with you, he said. He looked at us with some concern, as if he were letting us down. Can't get out of it. It's a murder trial. I'll keep trying to get the Shokesville sheriff. You all need me down there. Here's my number in Vicksburg. And remember, you want me to, I can be down there first thing Saturday morning. Papa thanked him and turned to Mr. Morrison. You'll see everybody get back. Mr. Morrison nodded. Don't worry about us. Don't worry now about us. Just bring the boy back with you. Just bring the boy on home. As we got into the car to leave, Mr. Granger's silver Packard turned onto Main and stopped in the middle of the street across from us. Miss Ellis, who had been sobbing off and on since she had returned, was dabbing at her eyes now. Miss Lee Annie, not a tear in her eyes, said, Wipe them eyes, Leora. Don't you let Harlan Granger see you crying. Lee Annie? Leora? The two women met his gaze. For the sunrise in the morning, he said, his words a long, slow drawl. I want y'all, and everything is y'all's. off my land." "Lordy, no, Mr. Granger," Miss Ellis cried, running into the street to plead with him. "Mr. Granger, no." Mr. Granger saw her coming, but disdainfully he gassed the Packard and sped away, leaving Miss Ellis desperately yelling after him. And I knew, even as she stood there crying out for mercy, Harlan Granger would not change his mind. He had gotten what he wanted. And that is the end of chapter 13. Chapter 14 is our last chapter. So, until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his peace.